Well, hello and welcome back to Smashing Pillars TV, where we are learning to know God and learning to do great exploits with Him. We're excited about this new episode. In our previous episode we recapped what we were studying, which was basically Genesis verse 1 out of chapter 1. And so we're gonna begin from there in verse 2. But first, let me introduce my co-host here, Sue Watkins.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Samuel Ramos.
Thank you.
Okay, so let's get started again real quick here because we have a lot of territory to cover.
Yeah.
So where we left off last time was with Genesis 1:2, and we were talking about how that God had brought light, and God saw the light that it was good, and God divided the light from the darkness and called the light day and the darkness night, and the evening and the morning were the first day. Now there's a couple of things before we go on to day 2 that I want to point out that we didn't get to talk about last time around.
Right.
Is first of all that God said the light was good. So the word is tob. This is an adjective that denotes that his expectations were met.
Okay.
Okay? So God says, okay, this light does exactly what I want it to do.
Okay.
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 So then he divided the light from the darkness.
Okay.
That word is badel. It is the bet dalet lamid. In other words, he placed a door between the dark and the light.
Okay.
Jesus is
The door.
the door.
Right. Okay.
Okay. So when you come out of the dark, you go through the door and you enter the light.
Right.
All right.
Wow. Okay.
All right. And this is why Paul also says that if you revert back to the dark, you had to cross the blood to do it.
Oh. Yeah.
Okay?
Okay.
So because the door has the blood over it, right?
We don't want to do that.
We don't want to do that.
Yeah,
Okay.
Yeah. Okay.
See, there's such beautiful meanings in all this, and Paul, who was a student, and I mean, he probably could cite the entire Old Testament backwards and forwards. So he was a student of the Word.
Right.
And he understood exactly all of the implications of what we're saying here. And this is why he used the ideology that and the idioms rather that he used. Okay. So God caused there to be a distinction between the light and the dark, a boundary.
Right.
It was a dividing line, which is basically, I believe, when he sped up time in the lower dimensions.
Okay.
Okay, so I think what God was doing with the light and dark was saying, okay, I'm only going to allow the enemy 6 days to work.
Okay.
Okay, so this is the first day. My dividing light and dark is the first day. Okay, so now you got 5 more. And then your time is up, buddy.
Wow.
Okay. So the first day, the first day was when he issued the off. Okay.
Right.
Okay, so that's our number one. Number 1 day is the off. It's where he says in his unified purpose is I'm going to build the house, and my house is going to exist in my light.
Right.
Okay.
Okay.
So the word day is yom.
Mm-hmm.
Interestingly, this actually means age.
Okay.
Okay?
Okay.
So the first age
Mm-hmm.
of what God was doing was bringing revelation.
Hmm. Very good. Very
Okay?
good. Yeah.
So it denotes a space of time.
Okay.
The pictograph form implies that day is the hand that secures the massive of people within the water. So it is during the daytime when God is working, when his sun is shining,
Mhm.
S-O-N is shining and lighting the people that are caught into the dark,
Right. Right.
that he's working.
So it says in Isaiah that the people
It
sitting
says
in darkness have seen a great light.
Right.
Okay.
Now, the word night is layel, and it means to twist, to turn away from light.
Mm-hmm.
So figuratively, the night is when the adversary works. It's when things turn and twist.
Right.
Okay, so it's the perversion, it's the deception.
Mm-hmm.
This is why we refer to people who are deceived as being in the dark.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
So that, all of that, what we have is that the Spirit of God passed over the faces of those that had been held hostage
Mm-hmm.
in the lower dimensions by the dark. And the Creator said light, and light passed over them and illuminated them. And God saw that what he wanted is what happened. He got light, and he declared and decreed that the light is good, and the darkness must be separate from and distinct from the light. He set a boundary. He marked off time. He formed the first era, the ERA, of the first day, which was the day in which light was securing the people.
Mm-hmm.
He revealed himself.
Right.
The day one is, in my opinion, is the unity of the Creator revealing his intent and separating his kingdom from the kingdom of darkness.
Mm-hmm.
Now, let's get into the second day. The two in the Hebrew is bet. And we've already talked about how the bet symbolizes, in pictograph form, symbolizes the house.
Mm-hmm.
So God was building a house. And so in verse 6, God said, "Let there be a firmament in the midst of the water, and let it divide the waters from the waters." Elohim said, "Let there be a firmament in the midst of the Mayim,"
Mm-hmm.
which is water,
Right.
"and let it divide the waters from the water." Elohim appointed an overlaying of sky between the waters. Other words, okay, so the earth is filled with water. He pushed up the waters and pushed down the waters, and in between was the sky. Okay.
Right.
When you study this out, it indicates that he hammered it. Okay?
Right.
All right. So this is his, metaphorically, he is separating the upper dimensions from the lower dimensions. If we use the symbolism that the Apostle Paul used, he's separating the first heaven from the second heaven.
And he hammered it in other words, he
Secured
secured it
it
with
His word.
his word.
Right.
Right.
Okay. All right. So firmament is an old English word that comes from the Greek steroma, which is best translated as the vaults of heaven.
Mm.
Okay. So the steroma
Mhm.
was translated from the Hebrew word R-A-Q-I-Y-A, raka. It's a primitive root that means to pound the earth because of your passion.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Okay? It's by analogy, what we have is an implication that he overlaid this sky with metal.
Okay.
Okay, so he's saying what's in the upper and the lower
Mm-hmm.
are separate.
Okay.
Okay.
Dimensions.
Now, in the physical earth,
Mm-hmm.
what we have is basically, if you thought of the globe, is the waters on the surface of the earth, and then a canopy
Mm-hmm.
of water as in the upper atmosphere, covering the
Mhm.
upper atmosphere.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Now, I'm not going to get into the argument whether it was ice or water. Okay.
Yeah,
It doesn't
yeah.
matter to me.
Sure.
Probably I would be logically it would be ice.
Right.
But nevertheless, so the upper water,
Mm-hmm.
the canopy from the lower. All right. And now you have sky.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So when we look into the Hebrew translation, we find that what God did was he marked the firmament,
Right.
the sky,
Right.
as oftov.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So again, what he's saying is that this region that I have
Mhm.
just created
Mm-hmm.
belongs to me.
Right.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So again, we have a boundary. Basically, you can look at this as a picture of God creating the door,
Right. Right.
enlarging the door.
Okay.
Okay? So he's putting a firmament, a separation between waters. So he's sealing also the lower dimensions from the higher dimensions. And God called the firmament heaven. Technically, let's call it sky. But going into the Hebrew, what he's basically said, he's calling this expanse, this firmament, the lofty area. And he named all that ascended out of the lower waters as his possession. So everything that, again, he's marking everything as his.
Mm-hmm.
And the evening and the morning were the second day. So day 2, what we see is basically the foundation of the house coming together. The hammering of the foundation.
Right. Right.
Okay. So day 1, the Creator is separating kingdoms. Day
Mhm.
2 is he's actually building the house. He's marking the foundation of his house.
Right.
All right. The literal meaning of this is the Creator brought forth an expanse between the upper atmosphere and the lower atmosphere. In other words, he established the air that
Oh,
we
wow.
breathe.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay?
Wow.
He gave us air to breathe.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Okay.
So this is why it's important that we understand basically if he's giving us air to breathe, he's giving us the breath of God.
Yes. Yes. I kind of saw you going there. Yeah. Beautiful.
Okay.
Yeah.
So let's continue on. In verse 9, God said, "Let the waters under the heaven be gathered together into one place, and let the dry land appear." And it was so.
Mm-hmm.
And God called the dry land earth,
Mm-hmm.
and the gathering of the waters he called sea. And God saw that it was good. Now, what I want you to get is a visualization. So you've got the globe.
Right.
We're not going to argue flatland here. You got
Okay.
the globe.
Okay.
All right. So you've got the water in the upper atmosphere,
Yes.
which some people call the crystal canopy.
Right.
You got the air, and on the surface you had nothing but water.
Mhm.
God separated the water on the surface. So the way the scriptures read and the interpretation is that on one side of the earth was land, on the other side was sea.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Okay. This was before.
There was
that.
yeah, it was, so there was not continents.
Right. Correct.
Okay. And as we go further into this teaching, you'll see where we get continents,
Mhm.
but at that point what we've got is land and sea.
Mm-hmm.
All right. And God's looked at this and he blessed it and said, "This is good." So now, same day, we haven't moved on. God said, "Okay, I want fruit in my earth." So he brought forth grass and herb and seed, yielding seed, and the fruit trees and anything that had seed in it came on this day. This was the third day. So the second day is where he's put in the expanse. Now we're on the third day. So the first thing he did was bring forth land, and then he made the land fruitful.
Okay.
Okay. Adam is created from clay,
Right.
and God told him to be fruitful.
Right.
Okay. Keep that in mind.
Yeah.
And this is, so you've got God doing two things on day 3. You have him saying twice something is good.
Yes.
You've got a double blessing
Yes.
on day 3.
Right.
This is
Yeah.
critical as we move forward with our understanding of the Bible. Day 3 is very symbolic of a double blessing day.
Right. Right.
On the third day, Christ arose.
Right.
Okay. Jonah was in the belly of the fish 3 days, 3 nights. On the third day, he comes out. Okay, so this is very critical. Day 3, anytime you see a third day, you're seeing a double blessing. So first he brought forth the dry land, and then he brought forth the fruitfulness. Now, okay, so let me just kind of go a little bit further with my notes here, because this is what I want to get to. God is building his house. He's marking his territory. On day 1, he assigned revelation. On day 2, he puts the dimensional foundations into his house. He marks and separates the upper regions from the lower regions. In other words, let's think of this. He's separating the celestials from the terrestrials. And he's securing the celestials so that they cannot interfere without permission with the terrestrials. This is the hammering, okay? So the literal meaning is he's bringing forth dry ground. He's gathering the waters of the sea. He's actually bringing a distinction between those that are in the dark, the sea,
Sure.
and those that are going to be on the land. And then he's giving them the ability to be fruitful. So dry land, okay, is Rababasha, and it means basically ashamed, okay, confused, disappointed. It also means, ironically, to come up out of the water.
Okay.
Okay. So, what could we gather from that? It means that until you're fruitful, you're going to be ashamed.
Wow.
All right. So, if you're caught in the seas, the word seas is yem, and it means to roar, to be noisy. So, this is why I think people who are caught up in deception are in pain and agony, and they don't even know it. So metaphorically, the dry land is coming up out of the sea because the seas are parting and bringing forth the land. So the confusion of the seas is leaving them, but they're still ashamed until God makes them fruitful. Okay. So those are the events of the third day. On the third, let's talk about the metaphorical meaning of the third day. It was on the third day that Abraham lifted up his eyes and saw where God had called him to go. Okay, it was on the third day that Jacob fled Laban.
Wow. Yeah.
Okay, it was on Exodus 19, God told Moses to tell the people to be ready, for on the third day he was going to come down and meet with them on Mount Sinai.
Wow.
Hosea 6:1 says, "Come and let us return to the Lord, for
Mhm.
he has torn and he will heal. He has smitten and he will bind up. After 2 days he revives us. On the third day he raises us up, and we live in his sight." John 2:1. On the third day was a marriage in Canaan. The mother of Jesus was there, and you know the story. Acts 10:40. Peter was speaking, and he said, "On the third day, God raised him up and showed him openly." Speaking of Yeshua's resurrection. So, at this point, what we have in these 6 days of creation is day one, the off, reveals the authority or the unity of the Creator. It separates the kingdom from the dark. Bet, day two, the house is formed. Day three, the gimbal. The gimbal pictograph is of a camel rising up. So the gimbal is the rising up. On the third day, not only was Jesus resurrected, he became the fruitful seed, which we're going to get to in just a minute. So when we get to talking a little bit later, when God talks to brings forth the animals, doesn't he tell them to maintain their kind?
Yes.
Stay within their kind?
Right.
Okay. Now, if you go into the Hebrew, in this particular verse where God is creating on day three, and he talks about seed, it's not the seed, it's his seed. It's the word that's used there. So Jesus is the seed. He is the word. He is the seed of God, right?
Right, right. There's so much in this one verse here, because from the beginning, I would read this, and I used to think he was just talking about seed producing after its own kind. I had no idea until you started to study this out that he was actually talking about his seed.
Yes,
Yeah.
because Genesis 1:12
Yes.
reads this way, "And the earth brought forth grass
Mind-blowing.
and herb yielding seed after his kind."
Yeah.
Not its kind, his kind. "And the tree yielding fruit, whose seed was in itself after his kind." So you see the parallel. When Jesus resurrected, I love this. When
It's awesome,
Jesus
yeah.
resurrected,
Yeah.
we became his seed,
Right.
and we are after his kind.
Yes.
We are created in his
His.
image. We are
Yes.
being conformed to his image, according
Right.
to Apostle Paul. So all of that said, this is what what God is doing with day three. He's talking about the resurrection.
From
Okay.
the beginning, yeah.
Yeah. So picture the resurrection, okay? So Jesus goes into the grave, but on day three, okay, so before day one, we see the need for the Passover,
Right.
the blood to be
Yes.
applied.
Yes.
So by the time we get to day three, we see the resurrection of that happening.
Yes. Yes. Wow.
Okay.
Praise God.
Yeah. So all of this absolutely kind means species. Actually, that's what the word means in Hebrew. It's mean, and it means species. So after his species,
Yeah.
what he is, we do not know,
Right.
according to Apostle Paul. But
Yes.
whatever he is, we are like him.
Yes. Yes. Wow.
Okay. We don't know, but we are like him. He's my God. He's my King.
Amen.
Okay. So he names everything here grass, herb, trees that have seed. Okay. Now, you know and I know that not every bit of vegetation out there has seed, but what he's naming here is to pinpoint the importance of the seed. And actually, this is what is going on and has been going on from the very beginning is a war for the seed.
Right. From Genesis
Just
chapter
right.
3.
Not just the war for the seed of woman,
Right.
but the seed of Yeshua.
Right.
Okay. So the seed is being warred over.
Mm.
W-A-R. Sorry about my southern pronunciations. Okay. So Isaiah 37:27. For their inhabitants had little power. They were dismayed and confounded. They were as the grass of the field and the green herb, as the grass on the housetops, and the grain blighted before it is grown. Now that's a picture of what happens before you apply Yeshua to your life.
Mm-hmm.
But Psalms 1:1. Blessed is the man that walks not after the counsel of the ungodly, nor stands in the way of sinners, nor sits in the seat of the scornful. But his delight is in the law of the Lord, and his law does he meditate day and night. He shall be like a tree planted by the rivers of water. Now stop right there. Rivers of water is a metaphor for revelation.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. A flow of words. Yeah,
A flow of words.
The symbolism there, yeah.
That brings forth his fruit in his season.
Yes.
His leaves shall not wither, and whatsoever he does shall prosper. So, what we have thus far is that in the beginning, before there was anything, the Creator from the eternal cut from himself and formed the higher dimensions and the lower dimensions for the Son to govern, to inherit, that they might dwell therein with their creation. And the lower dimensions became confused and uninhabitable when the persons of the dark fell to the earth, when they fell into the abyss.
Mm-hmm.
The Spirit of God passed over the faces that had been held hostage and of the lower dimensions. And the Creator said, light pass over them, and light did. And God saw the light was good, so he declared the light and the darkness be separate and distinct from one another. A boundary was set, time was given that night may work. During that time frame, since night twists away from the light, it will not have a free reign. The first era of time, or the very first day, was the day in which light secured the boundary that fences off the adversary, and at the same time reveals the Creator. The night or the darkness came first, but when the Creator restored creation to his intent,